I once believed that family was a fortress, a safe harbor from life's tempests. At 33, with dreams of building a life on my own hard-won merits, I welcomed my 37-year-old brother into my modest sanctuary. His arrival, accompanied by his gentle yet weary wife and their 3 wide-eyed children, aged 9, 5, and 2, carried with it a promise of redemption. Yet, beneath the veneer of desperate pleas and tearful eyes lay a confluence of secrets and betrayals that would unravel everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. How does one rebuild trust when every foundation is built on sand? A year ago, my brother's battered pride and unsteady footsteps led him here, exiled by our aging parents, whose support had once been a lifeline but now felt more like shackles. His story was all too familiar, a man who once spun dreams of bartending among the city's neon lights, who then chanced upon the muse of photography, only to see his passion fizzle out into a string of failed pursuits. One day he was chasing the promise of a professional camera and artistic acclaim, the next he was flitting from graphic design to painting, each new venture propped up by generous, if misguided, parental investments. Despite his ambitions, his efforts yielded little but frustration and mounting debts. Even as his older children trudged off to public school with little fanfare, the burden of rent, diapers, and the ever-looming future fell squarely on the shoulders of those still willing to help. Could it be that our greatest misfortune lies in the dreams we nurture for those we love? In our family's early chapters, our parents had extended their resources without question, funding not only his fleeting hobbies and even his wedding but sustaining an entire household when his income as a bartender barely sufficed. Then came the day when, in a move so cold it defied the warmth of familial duty, they demanded a sacrifice. His youngest child must be surrendered for adoption. The demand was as absurd as it was heartless, a calculated attempt to cut future costs, as if a child were a ledger entry rather than a life. My brother, desperate and overwhelmed, showed me screenshots of these chilling messages. Without a moment's pause for reflection, and blinded by my instinctive love, I severed my ties with our parents and welcomed him, convinced that in my embrace, he could find stability and learn to stand on his own. When does loyalty transform into a prison of delusions? I set strict boundaries. His refuge under my roof was to be temporary, a year and a half, no more, as I had plans to move on with my own life. I could afford to be magnanimous, with a spacious home and a career that whisked me away on frequent travels. Yet, my brother's habitual irresponsibility soon became the chink in our newfound alliance. Despite his promises, when I gently urged him to contribute to our household expenses, he deflected with vague assurances, claiming he had yet to save enough. It seemed his extra shifts at the bar, a supposed sign of his commitment, were little more than smoke and mirrors. I wondered, as the bills piled up and the public school bus rumbled by outside, whether my hope was nothing more than a futile gesture of misplaced compassion. Could the light of hope ever pierce the murk of denial? The fragile peace shattered one balmy evening at a friend's child's birthday party, a scene meant to be full of laughter and shared joy. In the midst of balloons and half-hearted smiles, I unexpectedly encountered our parents. Their sudden presence forced me into a confrontation I had long dreaded. Cornered by their insistent queries, I unleashed my pent-up fury, recounting the cruelty of their demand for my nephew's surrender. Before I could sink deeper into bitterness, my father, with a cool detachment, revealed an alternate narrative, one that painted our parents not as merciless tyrants but as aging surgeons, nearing 60, whose capacity to support another dependent was waning. According to him, it was my brother's own idea to pursue adoption, a misguided solution to the overwhelming burden of a third child he never intended to have. The texts he showed me were selective. They omitted the hesitant pleas of our mother, replaced instead by a calculated version of events. Was I the fool for choosing love over truth, or had the truth itself become too convoluted to discern? The revelation struck me like a physical blow. The delicate balance I'd so carefully maintained crumbled, exposing the raw underbelly of a family steeped in secrets. That same night, I returned home determined to confront the man I once believed I knew. The atmosphere was charged with a tension so thick you could taste the betrayal. My brother, his eyes darting with panic, barely had time to gather his thoughts before our confrontation erupted into chaos. Could honesty ever coexist with denial, or were we doomed to this tragic impasse? What followed was a maelstrom of accusations and bitter revelations. Voices clashed in a cacophony that turned my once peaceful home into a battlefield. In the midst of the verbal onslaught, his eldest, a striking, defiant 9-year-old burdened beyond his years, suddenly surged forward. With a strength that belied his tender age, he barreled into me, his small fists driven by a wild, incomprehensible fury. Before anyone could intervene, he produced a pencil, a fragile instrument transformed into a weapon, and began lashing out, repeatedly stabbing my knee as he screamed that I was unfit to stand against his father. The shock that rippled through the room was palpable. Even as my parents scrambled to restore order, I could feel my trust in my brother disintegrating before my eyes. In the violent language of a child, how do we discern the call for justice from the cry of abandonment? That moment, raw, unfiltered, and irrevocable, drove home the painful truth: I could no longer be the harbor for his chaos. With a voice hardened by resolve, I demanded he pack his belongings immediately, insisting that he take his children and leave. His protestations, filled with tearful desperation and frantic pleas for one more night under my roof, were met with a steely refusal. I warned that if he lingered any longer, I would have no choice but to involve the authorities. The threat of law enforcement, a specter that loomed large over our shattered home, spurred him into reluctant action. As he and his wife, whose own eyes were brimming with regret, hurriedly gathered their few possessions, I stood silently, knowing that the remnants of our once unshakable bond were now irrevocably severed. Was this the moment when tough love transformed into an irreversible rift? In the aftermath, as the echo of slammed doors and fading footsteps lingered, I attempted to nurse the physical pain, a knee bruised and throbbing from the child's desperate attack. Yet, the deeper ache was that of a spirit betrayed, a trust shattered beyond repair. Over the ensuing days, messages poured in from my brother, each one painting me as the callous villain who had abandoned his own children. He claimed that, thanks to my cruelty, his kids were now left to fend for themselves, forced into the reluctant care of his wife's parents. His words dripped with anger and accusation, contending that I was heartless for failing to consider the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Could one ever truly balance the scales of justice when the currency was the well-being of a child? In his subsequent messages, he revealed further turmoil, a heartbreaking ultimatum from his wife's parents. They had laid down a condition: his wife must either abandon a man they deemed irredeemably irresponsible or surrender custody of her children. The pressure was unbearable, a wrenching choice between the stability of family and the stark reality of consequences. His insistence that our actions were solely to blame for his downfall, labeling me as the heartless saboteur of his legacy, only deepened the chasm of disillusionment that had formed between us. How can love survive when every attempt at redemption is met with blame? Update 1. In the days that followed the explosive confrontation, silence enveloped my phone. I deliberately withheld any response to his desperate texts, each one a stark reminder of the chaos we had sown. My parents, too, eventually sought reconciliation, quietly mending fences in hopes of salvaging what remained of our family's dignity. They reminded me that my brother, now nearing 40, had been given countless chances to change his ways. His in-laws, steadfast in their conviction, had issued an ultimatum that, if honored, might steer him toward accountability. Yet as I replayed the day's events over and over, I wondered if our blind devotion had only paved the way for further ruin. Is it possible to untangle the threads of love and accountability once they've become so inextricably knotted? Update 2. Not long after, an unexpected twist emerged. My brother's in-laws reached out to our parents, inviting them to remain integral to their grandchildren's lives, a beacon of hope amidst the wreckage. My parents, ever warm and forgiving, accepted without hesitation. I, however, could not bring myself to agree. The vivid memory of a pencil-wielding child and the carnage of that fateful day were too seared into my soul. I made a painful decision, to distance myself from the grandchildren, to avoid any reminder of the day when innocence and rage collided in a flurry of violence. Though many branded me unyielding, even cruel, I knew that preserving my own battered spirit was the only way forward. Can a heart that has witnessed such pain ever open again without risking further agony? Update 3. As the weeks turned into turbulent months, the storm of family strife deepened. Amid my own demanding work and the relentless cascade of unforeseen events, the gravity of our collective missteps became impossible to ignore. My brother's in-laws, growing weary of the ceaseless drama, escalated their ultimatum to a stark threat: if my sister-in-law did not separate from my brother, they would pursue legal custody of the children. The very thought was as harrowing as it was inevitable. Neither parent, it seemed, was truly capable of safeguarding their children from the corrosive impact of endless dysfunction. Amid bitter arguments and tearful confrontations, it emerged that my brother and his wife had even contemplated abandoning their children, a desperate bid to escape the crushing cycle of irresponsibility. In the end, his wife, recognizing that she could no longer enable his destructive patterns, returned to her own parents' home, her resolve hardened by the stark reality of their situation. After long, painful discussions, an agreement was reached. My brother would see his wife and children only once a week, for no more than an hour, and only under the strict supervision of her parents or other trusted relatives. Meanwhile, my parents, whose hearts had always been a wellspring of unconditional love, retained the freedom to visit their grandchildren whenever they wished. In a bitter twist, my brother then chose to sever all communication, convinced that we were the architects of his ruin. Is redemption still possible when the cost of love becomes too steep to bear? In the silent wake of these decisions, I found myself reflecting on the twisted tapestry of our shared history. I did not regret the sacrifices I made. Money can always be earned anew, and the acts of kindness I extended once seemed noble. But I did mourn the loss of a brother who had been my closest confidant and friend. I mourned the way our love had blinded us to the truth, how every misguided act of support only deepened the scars we now bore. Despite the countless chances we afforded him, my brother's path had led him to a precipice from which there was no easy return. Can we ever reclaim what is lost, or are we doomed to wander the ruins of broken promises? Now, as I stare into the uncertain horizon, I carry both the weight of regret and the resolve born of hard lessons learned. My parents, though disappointed by the unraveling of our family's bonds, have quietly accepted that my brother must now face the consequences of his own choices. His in-laws, with a steely determination I can only admire from afar, continue to press him into accountability. And I, once so eager to save him from his own self-destruction, must now let him face the dark truth alone. I have no illusions that this painful chapter can be rewritten. The echoes of that violent encounter still reverberate in my every step, and the memory of a child's anguished cries is a constant reminder that love, when tainted by enabling and denial, can become as much a weapon as a shield. My heart remains heavy, yet I must press on, hoping that someday the lessons of this shattered covenant might give rise to genuine healing. In a world where love can heal or harm in equal measure, will we ever learn that sometimes, letting go is the only path to redemption?